Somewhere on the cold, rust-colored surface of Mars, sealed inside a slab of stone that has not felt liquid water in more than 3 billion years, there are molecules that should not be so easy to explain away. They are made of carbon, strung together in long, delicate chains, the same kind of architecture that, here on Earth, forms the walls of every living cell. A robot the size of a small car drilled into that ancient rock, ground it into powder, baked it in a tiny oven, and breathed in the gases that came hissing out. And what its instruments found has quietly split the world of science into two camps that cannot stop arguing. One side looks at these molecules and sees the most important discovery in human history, waiting to be confirmed. The other side looks at the very same data and sees nothing more than ordinary chemistry, the kind of thing that can happen on a dead world with no life at all. If this journey across an alien world grips you, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It would truly mean a lot to us, because the truth is that we are standing closer than we have ever stood to answering the oldest question our species has ever asked. And yet the final answer may be locked away in stone we cannot yet reach. To understand why a handful of molecules in a Martian rock could matter so much, you first have to understand the question that has haunted us for as long as we have been able to look up. Are we alone? It is a question so vast that most of the time we keep it at arm's length, because to truly sit with it is to feel the floor drop away beneath you. In one direction lies a universe teeming with life, where the spark that lit up our own world is a common thing, struck again and again on countless planets around countless stars. In the other direction lies a far lonelier picture, a cosmos of staggering size and beauty in which Earth is the single flickering candle, the one place where dead matter somehow stirred and woke and began to wonder about itself. For thousands of years, this question lived only in the realm of imagination and longing. We told ourselves stories about other worlds. We strained our eyes against the dark, but we had no way to actually check, no way to walk up to another planet and ask it whether it had ever been alive. And then, within a single human lifetime, that changed. We built machines that could leave our planet entirely. We flung them across the void on trajectories calculated to the meter, and we landed them, gently, impossibly, on the surface of another world. And of all the worlds within our reach, one has always drawn us back, again and again, like a question we cannot stop asking. Mars, it hangs in our night sky as a small, steady, reddish point of light. And for as long as humans have charted the heavens, it has been an object of fascination, sometimes of dread. It is the planet next door, close enough to dream about, distant enough to keep its secrets. And it is the one place in the entire solar system, beyond Earth itself, where the conditions for life as we understand it might once have been met. Not today. Today Mars is a frozen, airless desert, scoured by radiation, its surface colder than the deepest Antarctic winter, its thin atmosphere unable to hold warmth or shield the ground from the harsh light of space. But Mars was not always like this. And that difference between the Mars that is and the Mars that was is where this entire story begins. Roll the clock back more than 3.5 billion years, to a time when our own planet was still young, and life here may only just have been finding its footing, and Mars was a very different place. The evidence for this is no longer a matter of guesswork. It is carved into the planet's own face, written in the shapes of its landscape, and our machines have been reading it for years. There are dry riverbeds that wind across the Martian surface, channels with the unmistakable form of flowing water, complete with the branching patterns of tributaries and the smooth curves of meanders. There are vast basins that once held standing water, the floors of ancient lakes layered with fine sediment that could only have settled slowly grain by grain, at the bottom of a calm body of liquid. There are minerals scattered across the surface that only form in the presence of water, clays and salts that are, in effect, chemical fossils of a wetter age. Put it all together, and a startling picture emerges. Billions of years ago, Mars had rivers and lakes, perhaps even a great ocean covering much of its northern hemisphere. It had a thicker atmosphere, warm enough, at least at times, to keep water liquid on its surface. It had everything, as far as we can tell, that life would have needed to begin. Liquid water, a source of energy, and the right chemical ingredients. For a window of time that may have stretched across hundreds of millions of years, early Mars and early Earth were, in their broad strokes, remarkably similar. Two rocky worlds, both warm, both wet, both bathed in the light of the same young sun, both stocked with the raw materials of biology. On one of them, life took hold and never let go, spreading into every crack and corner of the planet, eventually giving rise to creatures capable of building rockets and asking questions. And the other? That is precisely what we do not know. That is the question that has launched a fleet of spacecraft, consumed billions of dollars and decades of human effort, and kept some of the most brilliant minds of our age awake at night. If the recipe for life was the same on both worlds, did the result come out the same too? Did Mars, our quiet neighbor, once stir with life of its own? To even begin answering that question, we had to send something to Mars that could do more than take pictures. We had to send a laboratory. And so, more than a decade ago, a remarkable machine was lowered onto the Martian surface in one of the most audacious landings ever attempted. A descent so complex and so terrifying that the engineers who designed it called those final minutes the 7 minutes of terror. The machine was a rover, roughly the size of a car, bristling with cameras and instruments and a long robotic arm. And it was set down inside a vast crater near the Martian equator, a bowl in the ground more than 150 kilometers across. This crater was chosen with great care, because long ago it appears to have held a lake, and at its center rises a mountain of layered rock, each layer a page in the planet's history, stacked one atop another like the chapters of a book waiting to be read. The rover's mission was not, despite what many people assumed, to find life directly. It carried no instrument that could spot a Martian microbe under a microscope, no test that could definitively cry out that something was once alive. Its mission was subtler and, in its way, more profound. It was sent to ask whether Mars had ever been habitable, whether the conditions for life had ever truly existed there. And to answer that, it would search for the chemical traces that life leaves behind, the molecules that biology builds and that, under the right circumstances, can survive for unimaginable spans of time. At the heart of this rover, tucked into its belly, sits its most extraordinary instrument, a miniature chemistry laboratory compressed into a space barely larger than a microwave oven. This lab can take a pinch of Martian rock, heat it to searing temperatures, and analyze the vapors that boil off, separating them out and identifying the molecules within with exquisite precision. It is, in essence, a robotic detective, capable of sniffing out the faintest chemical clues hidden in stone that has lain undisturbed since before the first life on Earth crawled out of the sea. And it was this little laboratory, working patiently across years of painstaking effort, that would eventually deliver the finding at the heart of our story. A finding so delicate and so disputed that even the scientists who made it have been careful never to overstate what it means. The story of the discovery begins, strangely enough, years before anyone realized what had been found. Early in its mission, the rover trundled across a patch of ancient lakebed and came upon a slab of pale, fine-grained rock, a mudstone. The kind of stone that forms from sediment settling at the bottom of still water. This was exactly the sort of place where, if Mars had ever hosted life, the evidence might be preserved. The rover extended its arm, pressed its drill against the stone, and bored a neat hole into its interior, pulling out a powder of rock that had been sealed away from the brutal surface for billions of years. Some of that precious powder was fed into the little laboratory and analyzed on the spot, and some of it, in effect, was set aside, kept in reserve, a saved sample that could be revisited later if new questions arose or new techniques were developed. At the time, the results seemed modest. There were hints of organic molecules, carbon-based compounds, but nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed for attention. The data went into the archives, and the mission rolled on. But science is patient, and some of its greatest discoveries are made not in the field but years afterward, by someone willing to go back and look again with fresh eyes. And that is exactly what happened here. A researcher on the team, returning to those old measurements with improved methods and a sharper sense of what to look for, noticed something that had been missed the first time around. Buried in the data were three faint signals, three tiny peaks that earlier eyes had passed over as noise. But they were not noise. Each peak corresponded to a specific molecule, and when the identities of those molecules were finally pinned down, the result was astonishing. They were alkanes, long chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms linked together in a row. One was decane, a chain of 10 carbon atoms. Another was undecane, 11 carbons long. The third was dodecane, a chain of 12. These were, by a wide margin, the largest organic molecules ever detected on the surface of Mars. Everything found before had topped out at around 6 carbon atoms. Suddenly, the rover's little laboratory had reached down into the Martian past and pulled out molecules twice that size, fragile chains that had somehow survived for billions of years, locked in stone, waiting. To grasp why 3 small molecules sent a ripple of excitement through laboratories around the world, you have to understand what these chains of carbon actually represent and why they were so unexpected. There was only a vanishingly small amount of each one, measured in parts per billion, a quantity so tiny it defies intuition. Imagine a single drop of ink dispersed through an entire swimming pool, and you begin to approach how faint these traces were. And yet they were unmistakably there, confirmed and reconfirmed, real. But the amount is not what set hearts racing. It was the shape. Long-chain carbon molecules like these are, on our own planet, deeply entangled with life. The scientists who found them suspect that, before being baked in the rover's oven, these alkanes were attached to something larger, that they are in fact the broken fragments of longer molecules, called fatty acids. And fatty acids are not just any chemicals. On Earth, they are among the fundamental building blocks of biology. They form the membranes that wrap around every living cell, the thin, flexible walls that separate the delicate machinery of life from the chaos of the outside world. Without fatty acids, there are no cell membranes. And without cell membranes, life as we know it simply cannot exist. So when a robot on another planet sends back word that it has found the likely remnants of fatty acids preserved in 3.5 billion-year-old rock, the implication is electrifying. It is as if we drilled into the floor of a lake that dried up before the dinosaurs were even a possibility, on a world tens of millions of kilometers away, and pulled out the chemical signature of the very stuff that cell walls are made of. For a moment, you can almost let yourself believe it. You can picture that ancient Martian lake, its surface rippling under a paler sun, and somewhere in its warm shallows, clusters of molecules organizing themselves, membranes forming, the first faint stirrings of something that might one day have called itself alive. You can imagine that the evidence of a second genesis, an independent origin of life on another world, has been sitting in a rock all this time, just waiting for us to find it. And if that were true, if these molecules really were the fingerprints of ancient Martian life, then this would be, without exaggeration, the most important discovery in the history of our species. It would mean we are not alone, and it would mean we never were. But here is where the story turns, and where the excitement collides with a hard and stubborn truth. Because those very same molecules, the ones that look so much like the signature of life, can also be made without any life at all. This is the cruel ambiguity that sits at the center of the entire field, the reason that no one involved has dared to declare victory. Carbon is the most sociable element in the universe, endlessly willing to bond with itself and with others, and it builds chains and rings and complex structures through processes that have nothing whatsoever to do with biology. Out in the depths of space, in cold clouds of gas and dust between the stars, complex organic molecules form all on their own, assembled by the slow chemistry of the cosmos. They rain down onto planets aboard meteorites and comets, seeding worlds with carbon compounds that were never alive and never will be. Deep underground, where hot water reacts with rock, geological processes can forge organic molecules from scratch, no living thing required. Even the long-chain alkanes found in that Martian rock could, in principle, have been produced by some purely chemical reaction on the ancient surface, a quirk of geology rather than a whisper of biology. And so, we are left in an agonizing position, holding a clue that points in two completely different directions at once. The same molecule that could be the broken remnant of a Martian cell membrane could also be the ordinary product of a lifeless chemical reaction. There is, written into the molecule itself, no label that says made by life or made by rock. Both stories fit the evidence. Both remain possible. This is why the scientists who made the discovery have been so scrupulously careful with their words, why they speak of molecules that may be biosignatures, of origins that remain uncertain, of findings consistent with life, but never proof of it. It would be the easiest thing in the world to leap to the thrilling conclusion, to announce that life on Mars has been found. But that is not how this works, and the history of the search for life beyond Earth is littered with the wreckage of claims made too soon, discoveries trumpeted and then quietly withdrawn, hopes raised and then dashed. The people doing this work have learned, often painfully, that when the stakes are this high, certainty must be earned, not assumed. That hard-won caution did not appear out of nowhere. It was forged in the memory of earlier searches, of moments when the world held its breath only to be told, in the end, that the answer was still unknown. Decades ago, long before this rover ever rolled across the Martian sand, two earlier landers touched down on the planet carrying experiments designed to test the soil directly for signs of living things. The idea was elegant. They would scoop up a bit of Martian dirt, feed it nutrients, and watch for the telltale signs of metabolism, the gases that living creatures exhale as they consume their food. And astonishingly, one of those experiments produced a positive result. Something in the Martian soil reacted, releasing gas exactly as living microbes might. For a brief electric moment, it seemed that life had been found. But the celebration did not last. Other instruments on the same landers searched for organic molecules in the soil and came up empty. And many scientists concluded that the reaction had not been biology at all, but some strange and unexpected chemistry in the harsh Martian dirt, a chemical mimic of life rather than the thing itself. To this day, a few researchers still argue about what really happened in those experiments, and the question was never settled with complete satisfaction. The lesson burned itself into the field. Mars is a trickster. It dangles answers in front of us and then snatches them away. It offers up results that look like life and turn out to be chemistry. And the only defense against being fooled is relentless, almost obsessive skepticism. Years later came another episode when scientists studying a meteorite that had been blasted off the surface of Mars and had eventually fallen to Earth announced that they had found microscopic structures within it that resembled fossilized bacteria, along with chemical traces suggestive of biology. The announcement was so momentous that it was made at the highest levels, presented to the world as possible evidence of ancient Martian life, and once again, the initial excitement gradually gave way to doubt. Closer study showed that the structures were far smaller than any known living cell, and that the suggestive chemistry could be explained without invoking life. The claim was not so much disproven as dissolved, eroded by years of careful counter-argument until little was left standing. Each of these episodes taught the same humbling lesson, and it is a lesson that hangs over the current discovery like a warning written on the wall. And so, knowing this history, the team behind the Alkane discovery did something that deserves to be understood and admired, because it is the very heart of how real science protects itself from its own hopes. Before they would let themselves believe what they had found, they set out to destroy it. They became their own harshest critics, hunting down every possible way the result could be a mistake. Every path by which these molecules might have crept into the data without ever having come from Mars at all. The most obvious worry was contamination. A spacecraft built on Earth and flown across space carries with it the chemical fingerprints of its own construction. Traces of the materials and lubricants and fluids used to build and maintain it. What if the molecules had not come from the Martian rock at all, but from the rover itself, a stray smear of earthly chemistry mistaken for an alien signal? It was a real and serious danger. The little laboratory had in fact suffered from a small leak of one of its own fluids, exactly the kind of thing that could muddy the results. So the team tested for it. They ran the same procedure on an empty container with no Martian rock inside at all, to see whether the molecules would appear on their own. They did not. They examined another rock the rover had drilled at a different site with similar properties, reasoning that if the alkanes were contamination, they should show up there too. They did not. They checked whether the lubricant from the drill could be the source. It could not account for what they had seen. One by one, the alternative explanations were tested and set aside, until the team had backed themselves into a corner from which there seemed no escape. The molecules were real. They were not an artifact of the machine. They had genuinely come from that ancient Martian mudstone, which meant that complex organic chemistry, the kind that on Earth is the handwriting of life, had survived intact on Mars for billions of years and was now sitting in the data, demanding an explanation. This was the part that even the most cautious scientists found impossible to dismiss. Whatever these molecules ultimately turned out to mean, their mere survival was a revelation. It proved that Mars can preserve delicate organic chemistry across spans of time that beggar the imagination, that the planet has not erased its own past as thoroughly as we feared, and that single fact changes everything about how we search. These long chains of carbon were not the first organic molecules the rover had found, and they would not be the last. They are, rather, the most dramatic chapter in a story that has been building for years. a slow accumulation of clues that together paint a picture far richer than any single discovery could on its own. Earlier in its travels, the same little laboratory had detected other carbon-bearing molecules in the Martian rock, smaller and simpler, including ring-shaped compounds that contain sulfur, the sort of molecules that can form part of more complex biological structures. There was also the long and maddening saga of methane, a simple molecule of carbon and hydrogen that the rover detected wafting through the thin Martian air. On Earth, the vast majority of methane is produced by living things, by microbes going about their quiet business, and so any whiff of it on Mars sets pulses racing. What made the Martian methane so tantalizing was that it seemed to come and go, rising and falling with the seasons, even spiking in sudden, unexplained bursts. Something was releasing it, and then something was making it vanish, and to this day no one is entirely sure what. It might be geology, it might be chemistry, or it might, just possibly, be something stranger. And then, more recently, came perhaps the most sweeping finding of all. Returning to a different rock sample, one the rover had drilled and stored years before, scientists conducting an exhaustive analysis uncovered the most diverse collection of organic molecules ever found on Mars in a single place. More than 20 distinct carbon-bearing compounds, several of them never before seen on the planet, all preserved together in one ancient stone. It was not the size of any single molecule that made this remarkable, but the sheer variety, the richness of the chemical palette. Mars, it turns out, is not a chemically barren world that happens to hold one or two curiosities. It is a planet whose ancient rocks are saturated with organic complexity, with the diverse carbon chemistry that, on Earth, formed the raw material from which life was eventually assembled. Whether that complexity ever crossed the threshold into life is still the open question. But the ingredients were there, in abundance, and they have been preserved. The pantry of early Mars, it seems, was fully stocked. What we still do not know is whether anyone or anything was ever there to cook. If early Mars truly had everything life needed, the obvious and painful question is what went wrong. How did a world so similar to our own end up as the frozen, irradiated desert we see today, while Earth flourished into a paradise of oceans and forests and living things? The answer is one of the most sobering stories in all of planetary science, and it carries a quiet warning for us as well. The trouble, it seems, came down to size and to a hidden shield. Mars is a smaller world than Earth, roughly half our diameter, and that smaller size proved to be its undoing. Deep inside a planet, heat drives the churning of molten material, and on Earth this churning generates a powerful magnetic field, an invisible cocoon that wraps around our entire world and deflects the ceaseless stream of charged particles that pours out from the sun. We almost never think about this shield, but we owe our lives to it. Because without it, that solar wind would slowly strip our atmosphere away into space, molecule by molecule, leaving us exposed and bare. Early Mars appears to have had such a shield of its own, a magnetic field that protected its thick atmosphere and kept its surface warm and wet. But because Mars is small, its interior cooled faster than Earth's, like a small stone losing its heat more quickly than a large boulder. And as its core cooled, the churning slowed, and the magnetic field weakened and eventually faded away. With its shield gone, Mars lay defenseless. The solar wind, no longer turned aside, began to eat away at the Martian atmosphere, peeling it off into space over hundreds of millions of years. As the atmosphere thinned, the planet could no longer hold its warmth, and the temperature plummeted. The liquid water that had carved rivers and filled lakes either froze solid, retreated deep underground, or escaped into the void. The The rivers stopped flowing. The lakes turned to ice and then to dust. The whole living possibility of the planet, if it ever existed, was slowly snuffed out. Not in a single catastrophe, but in a long, grinding decline that lasted longer than the entire history of complex life on Earth. Mars did not die in an instant. It faded, over ages, into the silence it holds today. And whatever may have been happening on its surface during those warm and watery years, whatever delicate chemistry or fragile early biology might have been taking its first tentative steps, was caught in that slow apocalypse, frozen mid-sentence, sealed into the rock as the world went cold around it. There is a further cruelty to the situation, one that makes the search harder still, and that brings us toward the unsettling heart of this whole story. The surface of Mars today is not a kind place for the molecules we are hunting. With its protective atmosphere stripped away, the bare ground lies exposed to a constant rain of radiation from space, a sleet of high-energy particles that, over millions of years, slowly tears apart the very organic molecules we are searching for. Radiation is patient and merciless. It breaks the long chains of carbon into smaller and smaller pieces, scrambles their structure, and gradually erases the chemical evidence of the past. This means that the topmost layer of the Martian surface, the part most easily reached by a rover's drill, is in effect a graveyard, a place where any ancient organic molecules have been steadily degraded and destroyed by eons of cosmic bombardment. The fact that the rover found anything at all near the surface is itself something of a small miracle, owed to the particular chemistry of the rock that happened to shelter those molecules just enough. But the richest, most intact, most revealing evidence, if it exists, does not lie at the surface. It lies below. Beneath the irradiated crust, deeper down where the radiation cannot easily reach, the ancient organic chemistry of Mars may be far better preserved, sheltered from the destruction above, holding secrets that the surface has long since lost. There, in rock that has never been disturbed since the days when Mars was warm and wet, the clearest answers may be waiting. And this is precisely the problem. To get at that buried evidence, you would need to drill deep, meters down into solid Martian rock, and no machine we have yet placed on Mars can do anything close to that. Our rovers can scratch and bore a few centimeters into the stone, no more. The deeper layers, where the truth may be hiding in its most legible form, remain entirely beyond our reach. We have, in a sense, arrived at the door of the greatest discovery imaginable, and found it locked, with the key sealed inside. We can press our instruments against the surface and catch the faintest, most ambiguous echoes of what might lie beneath, but we cannot yet open the door and look directly. The answer to whether we are alone may be sitting in the Martian ground at this very moment, written plainly in rock just a few meters down, and we cannot reach it. Even if we could reach those deeper layers, there is another, deeper obstacle, one rooted in the very nature of what we are looking for. If life ever arose on Mars, almost everyone who studies the question agrees on what it most likely was. Not creatures, not plants or animals or anything we could photograph. It would have been microbial, single cells too small to see without a microscope, the same kind of simple life that dominated our own planet for the vast majority of its history. For roughly the first 3 billion years that Earth was alive, there was nothing here but microbes, invisible to the naked eye, and yet they transformed the entire planet, filling the air with oxygen and reshaping the chemistry of the world. If Mars followed a similar path, then any life it hosted would have been microscopic, and that creates a profound difficulty. How do you prove that something invisibly small was once alive, billions of years after it died? On another world, a single fossilized microbe is almost impossible to identify with certainty even on Earth. where we can bring the full power of our laboratories to bear. The structures left behind by ancient microbial life are often little more than faint smudges in the rock, shapes and chemical traces that can be maddeningly difficult to distinguish from features produced by ordinary geology. To say, with confidence, that a particular smudge in a particular Martian rock is the remains of a living thing and not a trick of mineralogy would require instruments of extraordinary sensitivity and precision. The kind of equipment that fills entire rooms in laboratories back on Earth. And that is the crux of the whole dilemma. The instruments powerful enough to give a definitive answer are far too large and too delicate to mount on a rover and fling across the solar system. There is simply no way, with our current approach, to carry the necessary laboratory to Mars. The rover in Gale Crater is a marvel, but it is working at the very limit of what a mobile robot can do. And even at that limit, it can only ever return clues, never conclusions. It can tell us that the ingredients of life were present, that complex organic chemistry survived, that the conditions were right. But it cannot cross the final threshold and tell us, beyond all doubt, whether life was actually there. For that, the verdict has always pointed in one direction. If we truly want to know, we cannot keep sending our laboratories to Mars. We have to bring Mars back to our laboratories. This is the great hope that now hangs over the entire endeavor, and it is one of the most ambitious things our species has ever attempted to imagine. The idea is simple to state and staggeringly hard to do. Bring a piece of Mars home, carry actual Martian rock and soil across the gulf of space, deliver it intact into the hands of scientists on Earth, and let them subject it to the full, overwhelming arsenal of instruments that can never be sent to another planet. With genuine Martian samples in a laboratory here, we could do the kind of analysis that settles questions for good. We could hunt for the specific patterns that distinguish the chemistry of life from the chemistry of rock, search for the subtle preferences and arrangements that living things leave in the molecules they build, study any microscopic structures with tools of dizzying power. The clues that are ambiguous when read by a rover might, in a proper laboratory, finally resolve into a clear answer. And in anticipation of exactly this, another robotic explorer has already been at work on Mars, a second rover, roaming a different ancient location that once held water, carefully selecting and collecting samples of rock, sealing them into sterile tubes, and setting them aside. These sealed tubes are, in effect, a message in a bottle from the Martian past, a cache of carefully chosen stone waiting to be picked up and carried home. The plan to retrieve them is among the most complex missions ever conceived, a daunting chain of launches and landings and rendezvous that would have to unfold flawlessly across hundreds of millions of kilometers, with no room for error. It is expensive, it is technically forbidding, and its timeline has stretched and shifted under the weight of its own difficulty. But the prize at the end of it is almost beyond price. For the first time, we would hold in our hands a piece of another world, and with it, perhaps, the answer to the question that has haunted us since we first looked up at that red point of light and wondered. The samples are there, the bottle has been filled and sealed. All that remains is to find a way to bring it across the dark, and that, it turns out, is the hardest part of all. It is worth pausing to consider just how much rides on that answer, because whichever way it falls, the consequences for how we see ourselves are enormous. Imagine, first, that the samples come home, the analysis is done, and the verdict is yes. That Mars, billions of years ago, gave rise to life of its own, entirely separate from the life on Earth, a genuine second beginning on a second world. The implications would be almost too large to absorb. It would mean that life is not a fluke, Not a one-in-a-cosmos accident that happened here and nowhere else, but something that arises readily wherever the conditions are right, a natural consequence of chemistry and time. And if life sprang up twice in a single solar system, on two neighboring planets, then the obvious conclusion is that it must be springing up everywhere, across the unimaginable expanse of the galaxy, around countless other stars. The universe would be revealed as fundamentally fertile, a place where life is common, where we are one example among multitudes. We would never look up at the night sky the same way again, because we would know, for certain, that those points of light shine down on worlds that are not empty. Now imagine the opposite. The samples come home, the most powerful instruments on Earth pour over them, and the answer, after all of it, is no. The ingredients were there, the water was there, the chemistry was there, and yet life never came. Mars had everything it needed and remained forever sterile. That answer, in its own quiet way, would be just as staggering and perhaps more haunting. It would suggest that the leap from lifeless chemistry to living thing is far harder, far rarer, far more precious than we dared to hope. That even a world with every advantage can fail to make that leap. And it would cast our own existence in a startling new light. It would mean that what happened on Earth, the spark that lit up our own planet and led, after billions of years, to creatures capable of asking these very questions, was something close to a miracle of improbability, a treasure of almost unbelievable rarity in a vast and largely empty cosmos. Either answer would change us. Either answer would be among the most profound things humanity has ever learned. And both answers wait, unread, in the same Martian rock, indistinguishable, until the day we can finally hold it up to the light. Let yourself, for a moment, travel back to that warm and watery Mars, and picture it as vividly as you can, because the contrast with the planet of today is the most haunting image in this entire story. Stand on the shore of that ancient lake, billions of years ago. The sky above you is not the pale, dusty butterscotch of the modern Martian heavens, but something thicker, with clouds drifting across it, and a sun that, though more distant and fainter than the one we know, still warms the air enough to keep the water at your feet from freezing. Gentle waves lap against a rocky shoreline. Rivers wind down from distant highlands, carrying sediment that settles, layer upon patient layer, onto the lakebed below. There is no grass, no trees, no birds, no sound of any creature. For if there is life here at all, it is microscopic, hidden in the water and the mud, invisible and silent. But the world itself is alive with motion, with flowing water and weather and the slow geological pulse of a young planet. It is a place where, by every measure we can apply, life could have begun. And then, run the clock forward, fast, across hundreds of millions of years, and watch it all drain away. The magnetic shield flickers and dies. The atmosphere thins, bleeding into space. The temperature falls and keeps falling. The lake you are standing beside shrinks back from its shores, its waters retreating, freezing, vanishing. The rivers run dry and become the ghostly channels we map from orbit today. The clouds disappear. The sky empties. The sun, once a source of gentle warmth, becomes a harsh and distant light in a black and airless sky. And the mud at the bottom of the lake, with whatever it held, whatever delicate chemistry or fragile life was preserved within it, hardens into stone and lies undisturbed, locked away, as the world above it dies and goes silent and stays silent for billions of years. Until, one day, an impossibly long time later, a machine from another world rolls across that very lakebed, presses a drill into that very stone, and pulls out a pinch of the powder that has been waiting there since before the dawn of life on Earth. There is something almost unbearably poignant in that image, in the idea that the rover may be reading the last preserved words of a story that ended before our own story even began. Behind every dry technical detail of this search there is a human story, and it is one of patience on a scale that our impatient age can scarcely comprehend. Consider what it actually takes to make a discovery like this. First, an entire civilization's worth of effort must be marshaled simply to place a working laboratory on another planet, a feat involving thousands of people, years of design and testing, and a journey of many months across empty space, all of it culminating in a landing so precarious that a single error means the loss of everything. Then, the real work begins, and it is slow beyond belief. The rover does not race across Mars. It creeps, a few meters at a time, pausing for days or weeks to study a single rock. Its every move planned and double-checked by teams back on Earth who must wait out the long delay as signals crawl across the distance between worlds. A single drilled sample, a single careful analysis, can represent months of preparation. And even then, as this story shows, the discovery may not come for years. The molecules at the heart of all this were pulled from rock that had been drilled long before anyone recognized what was in it. The crucial signals sat in the archived data, overlooked until someone went back, with better tools and a more patient eye, and finally saw them for what they were. Think about that. The most exciting organic molecules ever found on Mars were, in a sense, discovered twice, once when they were drilled and stored, and again years later, when a researcher refused to let the old data rest and went looking one more time. This is what real discovery so often looks like. Not a sudden flash of triumph, but a long, grinding, deeply human process of looking and looking again. Of doubting yourself, of testing every alternative, of resisting the powerful temptation to believe what you most want to believe. The people who do this work may spend their entire careers pushing the question forward by a single increment, knowing they may never live to see it answered. There is a kind of quiet heroism in that, in devoting your life to a question so large that you can only hope to hand it on, a little clearer than you found it, to those who come after. The search for life beyond Earth is not the work of a moment or a mission. It is a relay race run across generations, and the runners know they are unlikely to be the ones to cross the finish line. They run anyway. And Mars, for all the attention we lavish on it, is not the only place we are looking, which makes the stakes of what we find there even higher. For if life turns out to have arisen on Mars, it transforms not just our view of that one planet, but our sense of how many other doors in the solar system might be worth knocking on. Out past the asteroid belt, circling the giant planets, there are worlds that seem at first glance utterly hostile to life. Frozen moons wrapped in shells of ice. And yet beneath those icy crusts, kept warm by the relentless squeezing of their planet's gravity. Some of these moons appear to hide vast oceans of liquid water. Hidden seas larger than all the oceans of Earth combined, sealed away in perpetual darkness. We have watched plumes of water vapor erupt from cracks in the ice of these distant moons, geysers spraying the contents of those hidden oceans out into space, almost as if the worlds themselves were offering us a sample. If life can take hold in such places, in dark oceans beneath miles of ice, far from the warmth of the sun, then the number of potentially living worlds in our solar system alone leaps upward, and the galaxy beyond begins to look crowded with possibility. The search on Mars is, in this sense, a test of a much larger idea. Mars is the nearest and most accessible place to ask whether life arises easily, and whatever we learn there will color how we think about all the other candidate worlds, the icy moons and the distant planets around other stars. A positive answer on Mars would be a green light for the whole search, a sign that we should look everywhere, expecting to find life wherever the conditions allow. A negative answer, a Mars that had every chance and stayed dead, would be a sobering caution, a reminder that the gap between the possibility of life and its actual emergence may be wider and deeper than we know. This is why a few faint molecules in a single Martian rock can carry such enormous weight. They are not just about Mars. They are a clue to the character of the entire universe, to whether the cosmos is a fertile garden brimming with life or a vast and beautiful emptiness in which living worlds are scattered like rare jewels, separated by gulfs of sterile space too wide to imagine. You might wonder, if these molecules alone cannot settle the question, what kind of evidence ever could? What would it actually take to prove that something was once alive on Mars? The answer reveals just how subtle and demanding this search really is, and why the laboratory back on Earth matters so much. Life, it turns out, does not just build molecules. It builds them with a peculiar style, a set of telltale habits that lifeless chemistry tends not to share. And it is these habits, more than the molecules themselves, that scientists hope to read. Consider the long chains of carbon found in that Martian rock. When life assembles such chains, it often shows a striking preference for particular lengths, favoring some over others in a way that purely random chemistry would not. A lifeless process, scattering carbon chains, tends to produce a smooth, even spread of different sizes, while life leaves behind a distinctive, uneven pattern, a fingerprint of preference. There are other such fingerprints too. Many of the molecules of life come in two mirror image forms, like a left hand and a right hand, identical but reversed. And remarkably, life on Earth almost always chooses just one of the two, building its molecules with a consistent handedness that non-living chemistry has no reason to prefer. A rock full of molecules that all share the same handedness would be a powerful hint of biology. And then there's the matter of the carbon itself, which comes in slightly different varieties, some heavier and some lighter, and living things tend to prefer the lighter kind, leaving behind a subtle imbalance in the proportions that can persist for billions of years. These are the kinds of clues that could, in principle, tip the balance from maybe toward yes. But reading them requires instruments of extraordinary delicacy. The ability to measure the handedness of molecules present in mere parts per billion, to weigh the difference between one variety of carbon atom and another, to map the precise distribution of chain lengths in a vanishingly small sample. This is laboratory work of the most demanding kind, far beyond what any rover can carry. And so we arrive, again and again, at the same frustrating wall. The clues that might finally answer the question are exactly the clues we cannot yet read on Mars itself. The rover can tell us the molecules are there. It cannot tell us whether they carry the secret signatures of life, because the tools to detect those signatures will not fit inside a robot, and the rock that holds them sits on a world we cannot yet bring home. The debate over what these molecules mean has not stood still, and recently it took a provocative turn that deserves to be reported carefully and honestly. A group of researchers, returning to the growing body of evidence, put forward a bold argument. They suggested that the particular collection of organic molecules found on Mars is difficult to explain by non-living chemistry alone, that the known geological and cosmic processes, taken together, do not comfortably account for everything the rover has detected. In their view, the simplest explanation, the one that ties the most threads together, may involve some contribution from biology, whether ancient life itself or the chemistry it left behind. It is a striking claim, and it captured attention precisely because it leaned, more boldly than most, toward the possibility of life. but it is essential to understand exactly what kind of claim it is. It is a hypothesis, an argument, a proposed interpretation offered up for the scrutiny of the wider scientific community. It is not a proof, and its authors did not present it as one. Other scientists will now do what science always does with a bold claim. They will probe it, challenge it, search for the non-biological explanations its authors may have overlooked, and demand more evidence before they accept its conclusion. This is not a weakness of the process. It is the process working exactly as it should. Extraordinary claims must run a gauntlet of skepticism, and only those that survive emerge as accepted knowledge. The argument that life best explains the Martian organics may, in time, be strengthened by new findings, or it may be undercut by the discovery of a perfectly ordinary chemical pathway that produces the same result. We do not yet know which. What the episode shows is that the question remains genuinely open, contested by serious people on the basis of real evidence, balanced on a knife's edge between the most thrilling possibility imaginable and the more mundane truth of lifeless chemistry. And it shows something else too, something heartening. It shows that even now, after all these years of patient searching, the evidence has not collapsed into a clear no. The possibility of life on ancient Mars has not been ruled out. If anything, the case has grown more intriguing, not less, even as the final, decisive proof continues to elude us. There is a particular discomfort in living with this kind of uncertainty, and it is worth sitting with rather than rushing past. We are creatures who crave answers. We want the story to resolve, the verdict to come in, the mystery to be solved. And here we have the grandest mystery of all. Are we alone in the universe? And the most tantalizing clue ever found. And yet the answer refuses to arrive. The evidence hangs suspended, pointing both ways at once, neither confirming nor denying. For some, that is maddening, an itch that cannot be scratched. But there is another way to hold it, a way that may be wiser and, in the end, more rewarding. The honest answer, right now, is that we do not know. And there is a kind of integrity in saying so plainly, in refusing to pretend to a certainty we have not earned. The scientists at the center of this work could easily have grabbed the headlines, could have proclaimed the discovery of life on Mars, and basked in the glory of it. Instead, they chose the harder and more honest path, reporting exactly what they found, and exactly what it might and might not mean, leaving the question open because the evidence demands that it stay open. That restraint is not timidity. It is a form of respect. Respect for the truth, and respect for a question too important to get wrong. And if we follow their example, we may find that the uncertainty itself has something to offer. To stand at the threshold of one of the deepest questions we have ever asked, to know that the answer is genuinely within reach and yet not yet grasped, is to live in a moment of extraordinary suspense, a moment that previous generations could only dream of. Our ancestors could wonder whether we are alone, but they could never hope to find out. We can. We are the first humans in all of history to have actual evidence in hand, ambiguous though it is, and actual plans, however difficult, to resolve it. We are living in the chapter just before the answer, and there is a strange privilege in that, in being alive at the very moment when the question is finally, after all these millennia, becoming answerable. The not knowing is not a failure. It is the last stretch of a very long road, and we are further down that road than anyone has ever been. Picture then the day that may yet come, the day the road finally ends. Somewhere in the future, if the difficult missions succeed and the sealed tubes of Martian rock are carried across the dark and delivered safely to Earth, there will be a moment unlike any other in human history. Scientists in a laboratory working with samples that began their existence on another world billions of years ago, will run the tests that no rover could ever perform. They will measure the handedness of the molecules, weigh the varieties of carbon, map the patterns in the chains, search for the subtle, unmistakable fingerprints of life. And at some point, the data will resolve, the picture will sharpen, and someone, perhaps a single researcher staring at a screen late at night, will become the first person in the history of our species to know, for certain, whether life ever arose on another world. Think about the weight of that moment. Every human being who has ever lived has wondered, in some form, whether we are alone, and not one of them ever knew. The question has been with us since the first time a person looked up at the stars and felt the vastness of it all. And in that future laboratory, that ancient question, carried by every generation that came before, will finally be answered, one way or the other. If the answer is yes, the universe will be revealed as a place that makes life readily, and we will know that we share the cosmos with countless others. If the answer is no, we will understand that our own existence is a rarer and more fragile miracle than we ever guessed, a flame that may burn in very few places, or perhaps in only one. Either way, the person who reads that result will be holding, in a sense, the answer to a question older than civilization itself, pulled at last from a piece of stone that waited patiently on a dead world for billions of years to give up its secret. We are not there yet. The samples are still on Mars, the mission's still uncertain, the answer still locked away. But for the first time, that moment is not a fantasy. It is a destination we can actually see, somewhere ahead of us on the road, drawing slowly closer with every step we take. It is easy, in the suspense of waiting for the final answer, to overlook how much we have already won, and that would be a mistake, because the gains are real and they are permanent. Step back from the single burning question of life and consider what this long campaign of exploration has already taught us. Not so very long ago, Mars was, to us, little more than a reddish dot, a smudge of light that inspired wild speculation and fanciful tales, a blank screen onto which we projected our hopes and fears. We imagined canals carved by alien engineers, civilizations rising and falling, invaders plotting against us. We knew almost nothing. And into that ignorance, we poured our dreams. Today, we know Mars as a real place, mapped in extraordinary detail, its mountains and canyons and ancient riverbeds charted, its weather tracked, its chemistry sampled. We know that it was once a world of rivers and lakes, that liquid water flowed across its surface for hundreds of millions of years, that it had a thick atmosphere and a protective magnetic field and, by every measure we can apply, the conditions that life requires. We know that it lost all of this in a slow planetary tragedy, and we understand, in broad strokes, why. We know that its ancient rocks are rich with organic chemistry, that complex carbon molecules formed there and have been preserved for billions of years. None of this was known to any human being who lived more than a few generations ago. We have, in effect, resurrected a lost world, reconstructed the biography of a planet from the faint clues it left behind, and that is a triumph of the human mind that stands entirely apart from whatever the final verdict on life turns out to be. And there is a deeper achievement still. We have learned to read another planet, to extract its history from its stones, to send our senses across the gulf of space and bring back knowledge that was utterly beyond our reach a century ago. We have proven that the great questions, the ones that once seemed forever sealed off from us, are not necessarily unanswerable, that with patience and ingenuity and the willingness to fail and try again, we can press ever closer to truths that our ancestors could only wonder about. Whatever Mars finally tells us about life, it has already told us something profound about ourselves, about what we are capable of when we refuse to stop asking. Return, once more, to the molecules themselves, because in the end, everything comes back to them. Those three fragile chains of carbon resting in their parts per billion traces inside an ancient stone. There is something almost miraculous about their mere survival, and the more you think about it, the more astonishing it becomes. These are delicate structures, easily broken, easily scrambled. And yet they endured. They formed, by whatever process, in the warm and watery days of early Mars. And then they were buried, sealed into sediment that hardened into rock. And there they remained, holding their shape, while the world around them transformed beyond recognition, while the lake above them froze and vanished, while the atmosphere bled away into space, while the magnetic shield died and radiation began its long assault on the surface, while on a planet tens of millions of kilometers away, life climbed from single cells to fish to forests to creatures who would one day build machines. Across all of that, across billions of years and the death of a world and the entire span of evolution on another, these tiny molecules held together, waiting. And then, in an eye blink of cosmic time, a robot arrived, drilled into their hiding place, and brought them into the light of analysis for the first time since they formed. When you frame it that way, the act of finding them feels less like a routine scientific measurement and more like an encounter across an almost unfathomable gulf of time. We reached back across billions of years and touched something real, something that was present when Mars was young, and we read, however imperfectly, the message it carried. Whether that message is the signature of life or merely the handiwork of lifeless chemistry, the fact that we can read it at all is staggering. These molecules are, in a sense, time travelers, voyagers from an age before our planet had any complex life, and we have caught them and questioned them. They will not give up their deepest secret easily, but they have already told us that they are there, that Mars kept them safe through everything, and that the ancient chemistry of a vanished world can still speak to us, faintly, if only we know how to listen. The rest, the final word on what they truly mean, remains just out of reach, buried a little deeper, waiting for the day we can dig down and hear it clearly. So where does the search go from here, now that we know the answer lies deeper than our current tools can reach? The path forward is becoming clearer, even if it is long and steep. The first lesson, written plainly in the radiation-scoured surface, is that we must learn to dig. Future missions are being designed with exactly this in mind. Machines built not just to scratch the surface, but to bore well beneath it, down to where the destructive radiation cannot reach, and where ancient organic molecules may be preserved in their original, unbroken form. A drill that can reach a couple of meters into the Martian ground could open a window onto chemistry far richer and far more legible than anything we have yet seen. Chemistry that has been sheltered from the assault above for billions of years. The second path is the long-dreamed-of return of Martian samples to Earth, the delivery of real stone into real laboratories where the full might of our instruments can be brought to bear, where the subtle fingerprints of life, the handedness and the chain-length patterns, and the balance of carbon varieties can finally be measured with the precision the question demands. And the third path runs through the development of ever more capable instruments, devices clever and compact enough to perform on Mars itself some of the analyses that today require a laboratory on Earth, narrowing the gap between what a rover can do and what the question requires. None of this will be quick. The challenges are immense, the costs enormous, the timeline stretching across decades. There will be delays and disappointments, missions postponed, and budgets strained, and there is no guarantee that any particular plan will unfold as hoped. But the direction is set, and the momentum, gathered over decades of patient work, is real. Each new mission builds on the last, each discovery sharpens the questions for the next, and slowly, step by deliberate step, we are closing the distance between ourselves and the answer. The rover in Gale Crater, with its precious, ambiguous molecules, has not closed the case. What it has done is something perhaps more valuable. It has shown us that the answer is really there to be found, that Mars genuinely holds the evidence, that we are not chasing a phantom. It has turned the search for life on Mars from a hopeful dream into a concrete pursuit with a clear, if difficult, road ahead. There is a parable hidden in the story of these two planets, Earth and Mars, and it is one we would do well to take to heart. They began as siblings, two rocky worlds born around the same star at the same time, built from the same material, blessed with the same early gifts of water and warmth and the right chemistry. For a stretch of their youth, they may have been hard to tell apart, two blue and tan worlds with rivers and lakes and skies. And then their fates diverged, utterly and forever. One held on to its atmosphere and its warmth and its water, and became a garden that fills, even now, with life in every conceivable form. The other lost its shield, lost its air, lost its water, and became a frozen tomb, silent for billions of years. The difference between them was not some grand cosmic decree. It came down to subtle things, to size and heat and the slow physics of a cooling core, to whether a planet could hold on to the thin envelope of gas that made all the difference between a living world and a dead one. Stand back and look at the two of them side by side, and the lesson lands with quiet force. A living world is not a given. It is not guaranteed. It is a delicate, improbable, precious balance that can be lost, and once lost, may never return. Mars is, in a sense, a warning written across the sky, a glimpse of what a world looks like when its life-giving conditions slip away. We look at it and we see, perhaps, a possible future, or at least a reminder of how thin the membrane is between a thriving planet and a barren one. And that makes the search for life on Mars more than an abstract curiosity. It is also a mirror. In asking whether that dead world was ever alive, we are also, indirectly, asking about the fragility of our own. We are learning, by studying a planet that lost everything, just how much we have, and just how carefully it must be guarded. Whatever the rocks of Mars finally tell us about life out there, they have already told us something urgent about life here, about the rare and fortunate balance that allows us to exist at all, and about how easily, on a long enough timescale, such a balance can come undone. It helps, sometimes, to let the sheer scale of the timescales wash over you, because it transforms how the whole story feels. The rock that the rover drilled is somewhere around 3.5 billion years old. That number is so large that it slips through the fingers of the imagination, so let us try to give it some shape. If you compress the entire history of the Earth into a single year, with the planet's formation on the 1st of January, and this present moment at the stroke of midnight on the 31st of December, then the molecules in that Martian rock would correspond to material from sometime in the early spring of that imaginary year, formed when our own world was still in its infancy. Everything that we think of as history, every empire, every war, every work of art, every person who has ever lived, all of it would be packed into the final fraction of the final second before midnight. Against that backdrop, the molecules on Mars are almost unimaginably ancient. They formed before there were any animals, before there were any plants, before there was breathable oxygen in Earth's air, in an age when our own planet's life, if it existed at all, was nothing more than the simplest microbes, and they have persisted, unchanged, ever since. When you hold that in your mind, the encounter between the rover and the rock takes on a quality that is almost vertiginous. We, a species that has existed for the merest sliver of cosmic time, reached out and touched something that predates nearly the entire story of life on our own world. We are creatures of the present moment, our whole civilization a flicker, and yet we have learned to read messages from a past so deep it makes our own history vanish to a point. There is humility in that, and there is also a strange kind of grandeur. We are small and brief, but our reach, the reach of our curiosity and our instruments and our minds, extends across billions of years and millions of kilometers. We can stand on one world and read the ancient chemistry of another, can interrogate stones older than almost everything we know, can ask a dead planet about its youth and receive, faintly, an answer. To be so small and to reach so far, that is perhaps the most remarkable thing about us, and the search for life on Mars puts it on full display. One might reasonably ask why we go to such lengths at all. Why pour so much treasure and effort and ingenuity into the question of whether some microbes once lived on a neighboring planet billions of years ago? It will not feed anyone. It will not, in any direct way, make our daily lives easier. And yet the drive to know is one of the deepest and most defining things about our species. Perhaps the very thing that makes us what we are. We are the creatures who cannot stop asking. Long before we had the means to answer, we were already wondering about the lights in the sky, already telling stories about other worlds, already straining against the limits of what we could know. That restless curiosity, that refusal to accept the boundaries of our ignorance, is the same force that drove our ancestors to cross oceans and climb mountains and venture into every corner of our own planet, and it is the same force that now flings our machines across the solar system. To ask whether we are alone is, in a sense, to ask who we are, to seek our place in the grand scheme of things, to find out whether the story of life is a story told once or told everywhere. The answer, whichever way it falls, will reshape how we understand ourselves and our world. And even the search itself, quite apart from any answer, ennobles us. There is something magnificent in a species that, on a small planet around an ordinary star, decides to reach out and ask the universe a question of this magnitude, and then, patiently, methodically, across generations, builds the tools to hear the reply. We could have chosen to look only inward, to concern ourselves only with the immediate and the practical. Instead, we look up and out and back across billions of years, because we want to know, because we have always wanted to know. The molecules on Mars are a chapter in that ancient pursuit, the latest fruit of a curiosity as old as humanity itself, and whether they prove to be the signature of life or merely the echo of chemistry. The act of finding them, of caring about them, of straining every nerve to understand them, is an expression of the best of what we are. We are the askers of impossible questions and the seekers of answers that lie just beyond our reach, and we are, slowly, closing the gap. If there is a single attitude that this whole long search has burned into the people who pursue it, it is a deep and almost reverent skepticism, a refusal to be fooled, and Mars has taught them this lesson the hard way, again and again. The red planet has a long history of seeming to offer answers and then taking them back. It has produced soil reactions that looked like the breath of living things and turned out most likely to be exotic chemistry. It has yielded meteorites with structures that resembled fossils and dissolved, under scrutiny, into ambiguity. It has shown us seasonal puffs of a gas that on Earth means life, and left us unable to say what produces it. Time after time, Mars has dangled the possibility of life before us and then withdrawn it into uncertainty. And each time, the scientific community has had to wrestle with its own longing, to separate what it wished were true from what the evidence actually supported. This is hard. It is hard because the desire to find life is so powerful, so woven into our hopes, that it constantly threatens to tip the scales of judgment. The greatest danger in this search has never been that we would fail to find evidence. It is that we would see what we wanted to see, that we would mistake our hope for proof. And so the field has developed a culture of extreme caution, a discipline of doubting first and believing only when doubt has been exhausted. It can look, from the outside, like frustrating timidity, this endless hedging, this refusal to just come out and say what everyone is thinking. But it is precisely the opposite. It is intellectual courage of the highest order, the courage to hold a thrilling possibility at arm's length, to test it mercilessly, to risk disappointment, rather than embrace a comforting illusion. When the day finally comes that someone announces, with confidence, that life did or did not arise on Mars, that announcement will carry weight precisely because of all the times the community refused to make it prematurely. The caution is what will make the eventual answer believable, and there is a quiet wisdom in this that reaches beyond the search for life, a lesson in how to think clearly about anything that matters, how to want something badly and still insist on the truth, how to stay open to wonder without surrendering to wishful thinking. Mars, the great trickster, has been, in its way, a stern and valuable teacher. Allow yourself one more flight of imagination, carefully labeled as just that, a possibility and not a claim. Suppose that life did take hold in those ancient Martian waters. What would it have been like? Almost certainly nothing dramatic, nothing you could have seen from across the lake. It would have been microbial, films and mats of single cells clinging to the lakebed, drifting in the water, perhaps coloring the shallows with faint tints, going about the silent chemistry of staying alive. For a time, in the warm and watery youth of Mars, such life might have thrived, spreading through the lakes and rivers, doing on Mars what its counterparts were doing on the young Earth. And then, as the planet began its long decline, that life would have faced a slowly tightening vise. As the water retreated, the habitable spaces would have shrunk. As the cold deepened and the radiation increased, the refuges would have grown fewer and fewer. The life of Mars, if it existed, might have retreated underground, into the last pockets of liquid water deep beneath the surface, holding on in the dark for as long as it could, until at last even those refuges failed and the final cell fell still. It is a desperately lonely thought, the idea of a biosphere snuffed out not by a sudden catastrophe, but by the slow, inexorable death of its world, fading as the planet faded, with no one to witness it and no one to remember. And if that is what happened, then the molecules the rover found would be something almost unbearably profound. They would be the remains, the last chemical echoes of a living world that died alone in the dark billions of years ago. They would be an epitaph, written in carbon, for a chapter of cosmic history that ended before our own began. We do not know if this is the true story. It may be that Mars was always lifeless, that those molecules are nothing but chemistry, and that the lonely biosphere never existed at all. But the mere possibility, the fact that we cannot rule it out, lends the whole search a weight of meaning that is hard to put into words. Somewhere in the rock of Mars may lie the memorial of a second Genesis, the only other instance of life we might ever find, and its fate, if it was real, would be a story of cosmic solitude almost too poignant to bear. So let us hold the two possibilities side by side one final time, in their full and equal weight, because the honest heart of this story is that both remain alive. On one side stands the most exhilarating interpretation imaginable. The molecules are real. They are the fragments of fatty acids, the very stuff of cell membranes, preserved for billions of years in the floor of an ancient Martian lake. They are joined by a whole diverse suite of other organic compounds, by the maddening seasonal dance of methane, by a recent argument that lifeless chemistry struggles to explain the full picture. Taken together, on this reading, they form the most compelling case ever assembled that life once existed beyond the Earth, a case that grows stronger, not weaker, as the evidence accumulates. If this interpretation is right, we are living through the slow-motion dawn of the single greatest discovery in human history, watching the answer to the ancient question assemble itself piece by piece. And on the other side stands the sober, deflationary truth that haunts every step. Carbon is promiscuous. Organic molecules form without life all the time, in space, in rock, in water, reacting with stone. Every single piece of evidence, taken on its own, has a perfectly ordinary, non-biological explanation. The molecules could be the debris of meteorites, the product of geology, the result of chemistry that never came anywhere near being alive. The methane could be geology. The diversity could be the natural richness of carbon chemistry on a once watery world. On this reading, what we are seeing is not the signature of life, but the unremarkable chemistry of a dead planet that merely happened to have the right ingredients and never used them. And the agonizing truth is that, with the evidence we have today, we cannot choose between these two stories. They fit the data equally well. The same molecules support both. We are suspended, genuinely and honestly, between the most thrilling and the most mundane of explanations, unable to fall to either side. This is not a failure of imagination or a lack of effort. It is the simple, hard reality of where the evidence currently stands. And it is why the rock of Mars remains the most important rock in the solar system. Because somewhere within it, or within its deeper, unreached layers, lies the one piece of information that would finally tip the balance. The answer we have been circling for so long without quite being able to grasp. Perhaps the reason this story grips us so tightly, the reason a few faint molecules in a faraway rock can stir something deep in almost anyone who hears about them, is that it touches a longing that lives in all of us, whether we admit it or not. There is a particular feeling that comes over a person standing under a truly dark sky, far from the lights of any city, looking up at the overwhelming spill of stars. It is a feeling of smallness, yes, but also of yearning, a sense of being a tiny part of something vast and mysterious, and a quiet wish, almost too tender to speak aloud, not to be alone in it. That wish is ancient. It has echoed through every culture, every age, every individual who has ever paused to contemplate the night. And the search for life on Mars is, in the end, that wish made concrete, that yearning translated into the language of drills and ovens and spectrometers and sealed sample tubes. When we send our machines to scratch at the Martian rock, we are not just gathering data. We are reaching out, across the dark, hoping to find some sign that the universe has stirred with life more than once, that the warmth and wonder we know on our own world is not a unique and lonely accident, but part of a larger story. The molecules the rover found are, in this light, more than a scientific curiosity. They are a thread of hope, faint and ambiguous, dangling from the most fundamental question we can ask. They do not yet tell us we are not alone, but they tell us that the question is real, that it can be pursued, that the answer is not forever beyond us. And that, in itself, is a profound comfort. For most of human history, the wish for cosmic company could only ever be a wish. Now, for the first time, it is becoming an investigation, with real evidence and real methods, and a real, if distant, prospect of resolution. We have turned our deepest longing into a search, and the search has carried us all the way to the surface of another world, where it now stands, waiting, just one layer of rock away from an answer. After all of this, it becomes almost impossible to look at Mars the way we used to. The next time you happen to catch sight of it, that steady reddish point of light hanging in the evening sky, you may find that it has changed for you, that it carries a new weight. It is no longer just a planet, no longer just a bright dot among the stars. It is a world with a drowned and frozen history, a place that once had rivers and lakes and skies, a world that may have come achingly close to the same miracle that unfolded here, and that may even, against all the odds, have crossed that threshold for a time before the cold took it. And resting on its surface, at this very moment, is a small, tireless machine that we built and sent there, slowly making its way across an ancient lakebed, drilling into stones older than almost everything, carrying the question of our cosmic loneliness in its mechanical hands. When you look at that distant point of light, you are looking at the place where one of the deepest questions in all of human experience is currently being asked, not in the abstract, not in a story, but in fact, with real instruments pressing against real rock. There is something quietly astonishing in that. Something that should never become ordinary no matter how many times we hear it. We have reached another world, and we are questioning it, and it is, however reluctantly, beginning to answer. The faint molecules locked in its stone are part of an unfinished sentence, the beginning of a revelation whose ending we have not yet read. And the night sky, once you understand this, is no longer a fixed and finished thing to be admired from a comfortable distance. It becomes an open question, a frontier, a place where the most important discovery of all might be waiting, just out of reach, in the rock of the planet next door. We have spent our whole existence wondering whether anyone else is out there, and now we know, at the very least, where to dig. Let us draw the whole journey together, because seen as a single arc, it carries a power that no individual fact can match. We began with the oldest question we know how to ask, the question of whether we are alone, and we found that, for the first time in history, it has stopped being merely a matter of philosophy and become a matter of evidence. We traveled to Mars, the one nearby world where the conditions for life may once have been met, and we learned that it was, long ago, a place of rivers and lakes, warm and wet and stocked with everything life needs. We followed a tireless robot as it drilled into an ancient lakebed and, after years of patient work, pulled from the stone the largest, most complex organic molecules ever found on the planet, fragile chains of carbon that on Earth are bound up with the chemistry of life itself. We felt the thrill of what they might mean, the possibility that we were holding the chemical signature of a second Genesis, and then we felt that thrill collide with the hard truth that the very same molecules can form with no life at all. We saw the rigor with which the discovery was tested, the history of false dawns that taught such caution, and the recent arguments that have only deepened the mystery without resolving it. And we arrived, finally, at the unsettling core of it all. The recognition that the decisive answer lies deeper than our tools can currently reach. Buried in rock we cannot yet retrieve. Locked away on a world we can visit, but not yet fully interrogate. That is where we stand today, suspended between the greatest discovery imaginable and the quiet possibility of mere chemistry, with the truth waiting patiently just beneath the surface of another planet. It is an extraordinary place to be, this threshold, this last stretch of a road that humanity has been walking, in one form or another, since the very beginning. We are closer than we have ever been, and yet the final step remains ahead of us, demanding more patience, more ingenuity, more of the stubborn refusal to stop asking that has carried us this far. It is worth remembering, too, that this single rover is not working alone, and that the search for life on Mars has become one of the great collective endeavors of our age. Around the red planet, a whole fleet of machines now wheels and watches. Spacecraft orbit overhead, mapping the surface in extraordinary detail, sniffing the thin air for trace gases, photographing the ancient riverbeds and lakebeds from above, and guiding the explorers on the ground toward the most promising places to look. Other rovers and landers have come and gone and continue to operate, each adding its own piece to the puzzle, each building on what the others have learned. And behind every one of these machines stand thousands of people, scientists and engineers drawn from many nations, speaking many languages, who have pooled their knowledge and their effort toward a goal that belongs to no single country and no single generation. The question of life on Mars is too large for any one group to answer alone, and so it has quietly become a shared human project, a rare example of our species cooperating across its many divisions in pursuit of something that transcends them all. There is a kind of beauty in that, in the thought that while we so often struggle to agree on anything down here, we have managed, out there, to work together to ask the universe whether we are alone. When the data comes back from Mars, it is shared, studied, argued over, and built upon by people who may never meet, united only by a common curiosity and a common refusal to stop until the question is answered. The molecules in that Martian rock were found by one team, but the search that found them rests on the labor of countless others, stretching back decades, reaching across borders. It is, in the truest sense, humanity's search, not the project of any one of us, but the shared inheritance of all of us, handed down and added to and carried forward. A relay of curiosity that has already outlasted careers and will likely outlast lifetimes before it reaches its end. And there is one more horizon worth glimpsing, one that may in time change this search entirely. For all the brilliance of our robots, there is a growing dream of sending not just machines to Mars, but people. The idea of human beings standing on that rust-colored ground, looking up at a sky in which the sun appears smaller and paler than we have ever seen it, was once the stuff of pure fantasy, and it remains daunting almost beyond description. The distance is vast, the journey long and perilous, the surface deadly to unprotected life. Yet it is no longer unthinkable. Plans are drawn, technologies developed, and the question of whether humans will one day walk on Mars has shifted from whether to when. And if that day ever comes, it would transform the search for ancient life in a single stroke. A human geologist standing on the Martian surface, with the judgment and adaptability and sheer ingenuity that no robot can match, could do in an afternoon what takes a rover months, could recognize the unexpected, follow a hunch, choose exactly the right rock to split open, drill deeper than any machine we have yet sent. The patient, ambiguous clues that our robots gather from a distance might, in human hands, resolve far more quickly into answers. There is something fitting, even poetic, in that prospect. The question of whether life ever arose on Mars has been pursued, so far, entirely by proxy, by machines acting as the distant senses of a curious species that has never set foot there. To finally send ourselves, to close that gap of distance and let human eyes and human hands take up the search directly, would be to complete a journey that began when our ancestors first wondered about the lights in the sky. It would mean that the creatures asking whether they are alone had traveled, at last, to the one nearby world that might hold the answer. To seek it in person. We are not there yet, and the road is long and uncertain. But the molecules waiting in the Martian rock are, in a sense, a summons, a reason to keep pushing outward, an answer that may one day be claimed not by a robot's faint and distant readings, but by a person crouched on the surface of another world, holding a piece of it up to the light. It is worth lingering, for a moment, on the sheer improbability of how these molecules were even detected, because the method is a small marvel in its own right. The rover cannot simply look at a rock and see the molecules inside it. Carbon chains a few atoms long, present in mere parts per billion, are invisible to any camera, hidden deep within the structure of the stone. To find them, the little laboratory in the rover's belly performs a kind of controlled destruction. It takes the powder ground from the drilled rock and feeds it into a tiny oven, and then it heats that powder fiercely, driving the temperature up and up until the molecules locked within the rock break free and boil off as gases. Those liberated gases are then funneled into instruments that can sort them out and identify them, separating the stream of vapor into its individual components and reading the unique signature of each one. It is a bit like trying to learn the recipe of a cake you cannot see by carefully burning a crumb of it and analyzing the smoke. Every molecule, when it breaks apart and vaporizes, leaves a distinctive trace, a pattern that betrays its identity. And by reading those patterns with great care, the scientists can reconstruct what was present in the original rock. This is delicate, exacting work, made harder still by the fact that it must be carried out by a robot millions of kilometers away, with no human hand to adjust anything, every step programmed and sent across space and executed in the cold and the dust of another world. And it was within this stream of analyzed vapor, amid all the expected and ordinary components, that the three faint signals of the long carbon chains were eventually found. Not in a dramatic flash, but as subtle peaks in the data, easy to miss, demanding to be confirmed and reconfirmed before anyone would believe them. That such a process works at all, that we can extract the chemical history of an ancient rock by baking a pinch of it inside a machine on another planet and reading the smoke, is one of those achievements so routine to the people who do it, and so astonishing to everyone else. It is the quiet, unglamorous genius behind the headlines, the patient cleverness that turns a faraway stone into a story we can read. Whatever else these molecules turn out to mean, one lesson from them is already certain and already changing how we search, and it deserves to be said plainly. Before this discovery, there was a real fear that the Martian surface might have erased its own past too thoroughly, that billions of years of radiation and harsh chemistry would have scrubbed away any delicate organic molecules long ago, leaving nothing for us to find no matter how hard we looked. The fragile carbon chains pulled from that ancient mudstone put that fear to rest. They proved that, in the right kind of rock, under the right conditions, complex organic molecules can survive on Mars for billions of years, intact enough to be identified. That single fact is a quiet turning point. It means the search is not hopeless. It means the evidence we seek, if it ever existed, may genuinely still be there, preserved and waiting, rather than long since destroyed. And it tells future missions where to look, pointing them toward the fine-grained sediments of ancient lakebeds and the sheltered layers below the surface, the places most likely to have kept their secrets. In a search defined by uncertainty, this is something solid to stand on. We now know that Mars is a planet that can remember, that its stones can hold the chemistry of the distant past across spans of time we can barely comprehend. And a planet that can remember is a planet worth questioning, because the answers, if they are anywhere, have not been lost. They are simply waiting to be found. There is a final, human-sized detail in all of this that is easy to overlook amid the talk of molecules and aeons, and it is the simple endurance of the little machine itself. The rover was designed to last for a couple of years. It has now been laboring on the surface of Mars for well over a decade, far beyond anything its builders dared to promise. Its wheels worn and torn by the rough terrain, its systems aging, and yet still it rolls on. Still it drills. Still it sends its findings home across the void night after night. There is something quietly moving in that, in the image of a lone, battered robot, faithful to a mission its makers entrusted to it long ago, continuing to ask the great question on our behalf, day after day, in a place where no human has ever stood. It will not last forever. One day it will fall silent, as all machines do, and another will take up the search. But for now it endures, a small emissary of a curious species, grinding patiently across an ancient lakebed, pulling the deep past out of the rock, one careful sample at a time. And so we return, at the end, to where we began, to that slab of stone on the cold surface of Mars, holding its delicate chains of carbon, keeping its secret. For billions of years it waited, through the death of its world and the entire unfolding of life on ours, until a machine from another planet arrived to read the first faint lines of its message. We have heard enough of that message to know that it matters, enough to feel the question trembling on the edge of an answer, but not yet enough to know for certain what it says. The molecules may be the handwriting of an ancient Martian life, the proof that we have never been alone. Or they may be nothing more than the patient chemistry of a lifeless world, a beautiful red herring that taught us how careful we must be. The honest truth, the truth we must be brave enough to hold, is that we do not yet know, and that the knowing will require us to reach deeper than we have ever reached, into rock that lies beyond our current grasp. But make no mistake about how far we have come. We are a species that began by wondering at the lights in the sky, and we have grown into one that can land laboratories on other worlds and read the chemistry of stones older than life on Earth. We have taken the most ancient and the most profound of questions and, against all odds, made it answerable. The answer is out there, on Mars, in the rock, waiting. It may take years, it may take decades, it may take the patient labor of generations yet unborn. But the search will go on, because we cannot help ourselves, because the question is too important, and the longing too deep to ever set aside. So the next time you stand beneath a clear night sky and find that small red point of light among the stars, let yourself feel the wonder of it. Somewhere on that distant world, the answer to whether we are alone may be sitting quietly in the ground, just beneath the reach of our instruments, waiting for the day we finally dig down and hear it spoken clearly. And let that thought be not a frustration, but an invitation, the most thrilling invitation the universe can offer, to keep reaching, to keep asking, and to never stop looking up into the depths of the night.